Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Hit Reviews with your host, Arlyeon. Today's review title was helpfully provided by its developers, Barak Decay, whom you may recall I held an interview with. Which means, that's right, I'll be talking about the surreal, urban, survival, horror-infused adventure that is a mouthful, Yuppie Psycho. It's a title I've been waiting for the release of for a while, especially since I got to tinker around with it in its fledgling guts due to some beta testing. So, find out if I think this game is bewitching, or if it ought to be burned at the stake. Things are introduced in an innocuous enough fashion, as you find yourself in the cheap shoes of one Brian Pasternak, an individual of low societal standing who has somehow found himself hired on at one of the most prestigious businesses around. Specifically, the not ominously named at all, Sintracor. Sure, it low-key nudges the player that they're in a world which has to be classist as hell and also dystopian as fuck, but it's only when they begin to take the elevator up and have a probably epilepsy-inducing panic attack and then wander in an office that has "Kill the Witch" smeared on a wall with what's probably not tomato juice, that the players start to get an idea that things are going to go downhill fast. What ensues is a rather bewildering investigation of sorts, as the players find themselves needing to carry out this mysterious task, both by trying to find out who and what is the witch, as well as how they're going to actually undertake the grisly task. And honestly, the narrative does a fairly decent job of building itself up, as well as fleshing out the world at large. There's a fairly diverse cast of characters, some of whom are pretty likable, and some of which I wanted to punch in the kidneys and then throw down an elevator shaft. But, you know, in like a properly fleshed out way. Anyways. There were countless bits of foreshadowing towards certain elements of the plot, which actually were only made better by the red herrings within the story's framework. It made me genuinely invested in the task of trying to parse out who is the witch, and I really found myself just becoming enraptured with the story at large as it progressed. I think it was also rather neat that a number of the choices I made in the game could result in different endings, including one incredibly early on, as well as providing some permutations to the final ending and the ensuing epilogue. Oh, and the fact that the game tied its VHS collectibles to some altogether uncannily creepy videos, which managed to be distressing in their own right, but also tied to the story at large, was pretty neat. Mechanically, the game starts off simply enough, introducing players to the process of, well, wandering around and talking to everyone, and then searching through everything that is not nailed down and some things that are. In fact, the game provides you with a fair amount of downtime to wander the Sintracor building, leaning on the exploration and adventure elements, and allowing you to take your time, get your bearings, and drink deeply of the office's all-pervasive friggin' weirdness. Though it also teaches you that rummaging through everyone's stuff rewards you with things like coffee beans and credits to buy things like more coffee beans, since coffee is the precious lifeblood of would-be witch hunters and helps them recover from grievous wounds. Man, I'd be such a good witch hunter. I like bleed coffee and matcha. So much caffeine. Still, it shouldn't take long for Yuppie Psycho to also introduce you to its, more hostile work environments. Like, recklessness will get you killed pretty quickly. As even though you do have a health gauge, both the creatures and the various unsafe work conditions you'll encounter conspire to see you retired. Permanently. What's more, as far as the survival horror aspect goes, Yuppie Psycho focuses more on the surviving aspect, as you don't actually have the means to fight back against any of the various things that populate the building. Instead, you'll end up needing to run away and hide from them, as well as just altogether avoid them, through gathering a fairly unhealthy pantry of healing items, and maybe some pencils. Pencils help. But no, seriously, I think a good portion of my time was spent, like, hanging out in the cafeteria after I ninja looted an area clean. Like, there's something sort of relaxing about sitting down and just taking all the various bits of junk food I collected and then turning them into, well, warmed up pizzas, cooked instant noodles, fresh coffee, and grilled cheese sandwiches. Literally, a complete breakfast there. Oh, and they did help with the more murderous moments of the game, where you end up forced to contend with boss-like creatures. Whilst one of these has you trying to figure out a way to fight back, by and large these play out like puzzles, where you end up just doing a fair bit of skulking and trying not to die. Though that might be tied to the fact that the only dependable way that you can inflict any sort of harm to anything in the game is tied to the landmine-like creatures that you may occasionally encounter, and in that case, your only means of defusing them is by stabbing them with pencils, which are quite limited in nature, by the way. Oh, and those aren't the only finite resources in the game, given that the game ascribes to a certain trope that I absolutely hate. And that is limited save points. I tolerate it, sure, but for those folks who save religiously, welcome to your hell, as you'll be wandering through a game where you have a limited, though fairly generous amount of saves that you can find. Which paper, man? Not that you can save anywhere, mind you, given that save locations are printers, so the act of saving at least requires you to go out of your way to backtrack to one of those locations. That said, this can still lead to some awkward situations, especially considering that the game requires you to burn some of those witch papers you find to progress the story, and then give up even more for an item required to advance. And you can optionally torch even more after that if you want an item that makes a certain section of the game far less daunting. It's just really nerve-wracking. Honestly though, I was pretty good about hoarding items throughout the game and avoiding saving for good chunks of time, so I generally had something like 10 plus witch papers on me, but it was still tremendously stressful to me. Though I think part of it was due to a crash bug that used to occur when you were streaming or recording with OBS, and which kicked in when an in-game cutscene resolved. Yeah, that was pretty terrible. As of writing this, there is a beta branch fix for it, though that still leaves a potential bit of aneurysm-inducing frustration for streamers in the main branch. And, you know, part of that's because the graphics in Yuppie Psycho are on point. The animated cutscenes are slick as hell, being some awesome bits of pixel work that give a rather distinct anime-inspired flavor. Oh, and the VHS tapes provide their own particular experience, given that they play out like weird, kitschy, live-action home videos, complete with the sort of video hiccups you'd expect from, like, old-school tapes. They're low-budget looking, and yet it fits so goddamn well into the tape's backstories and also the game at large, and it still does so much justice to what they're showcasing. Which, I mean, again, the fact that I wanted to see these through is why I ended up headbutting against that crash bug so many times. I mean, I'd also like to mention that even the non-cutscene-oriented graphics are pretty darn solid, both in regards to the character animations and their portraits, as well as the few still images that are placed in the game. Like, it really is visually appealing. Anyways, sorry to do things slightly out of order, but, you know, all that had to be said. As much as the water got muddied there, I have no qualms with Yuppie Psycho's audio. In fact, I could basically just sing praises about it all day. It has such a vibrant soundtrack, which manages to give so much life to the world at large, to help you wind down between segments of unpleasantness, or to just amplify all the stress and anxiety you're feeling up to 11, while you're busy hiding from the witch's underlings. Memories. Anyways, also shout out to the friggin' secret song voices for being so good. Like, I really enjoyed it. 100%, all my heart. You got it. Also, the sound effects in the game are great because they frequently played at just the right moment to be either delightfully creepy or just really funny and corny. Final thoughts time! When I initially received the review copy for this game, I was worried that having poked around the game as a quality assurance tester was going to make me more likely to overlook its faults. As it stands, it just ended up being that I was a lot more pissed off when I encountered the crash bug, since that existed since the beta. But anyways, the fix was implemented after I made a bug report, so I guess Still, given there's currently a functional fix in the beta path that's apt to hit full release before this review does, hopefully, and the fact that it really only hinders streamers using OBS, I'd be sort of remiss to penalize the game as a whole for it. So, consider this a disclaimer instead, because, Yuppie Psycho does benefit from having a madly captivating narrative with a whole lot to just discover plot-wise. Like, seriously, even though I'm not a fan of limited saves, the actual act of going around, solving puzzles, and not dying is ultimately just... it ends up being an enjoyable experience for me. More playing the game than the limited saves, I'll say that. And honestly, the game's balance did feel more than fair. Also, I gushed about earlier, but the music's great and the visuals are on point. So, I'd just like to say that in essence, I just rate this game as a crit hit in and of itself, but if you are a streamer relying on OBS, do bear in mind that until a patch hits, you might encounter some rough spots, and so stream at your own peril. I'd also like to mention, for those folks who are out of the loop, in case you're not familiar with the way I rate games, it comes in a nice 5 tiers. First off, this is our crit hit. This is a game I'm going to recommend to basically anyone because I love it so much, and I think that it's genuinely a good title that people should dive into. Then there's the hits. Those titles which are pretty good. I'm probably not going to gush about it endlessly or obsessively go back and forth over it again and again, but it's a pretty solid title. You have fumbles, which are games that I am likely only going to recommend to someone who is a fan of that genre to start with. So, if you're big into adventure games, but I rate this thing as a fumble, I mean, it might be a game for you, but if you're not big into adventure games, then it might not be. That's what a fumble is. A fail is I'm just never going to recommend it to anyone for various balance reasons or what have you, whereas crit fails are... it's just a train wreck, a buggy mess. If I rate something a crit fail, it has clearly shit the bed. That's about that. Thanks again to you folks for both tuning in and sticking till the end. Whether you agree or disagree with my thoughts, I'd love to hear from you folks in the comments. And for those interested in more indie reviews, interviews with the developers, and also maybe some TTRPG goodness on Mondays, feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you can get notified when we have a new release. You can also join our Discord. There's a link in the banner or the description so you can become a part of our community. It's all nice, cozy, and friendly in there. And lastly, if you'd like to help support the channel, we do have a coffee running now to help supplement funds for our lovely editors and to make sure that we can continue to provide quality content. Again, check the description of the banner for them links. Anywho, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks. Sintracore.